In the next few days, literally, a question of a few weeks maximum, Iran and Russia are going to sign their comprehensive strategic partnership agreement, which has been basically, it has been debated for the past 2 years. It's very comprehensive, very detailed. It will be signed in person by Pezeshkian and Putin, most certainly in Moscow. And that includes, of course, military collaboration, which is something that we're going to start to see more and more when it comes to the Israel-Iran undeclared but de facto war now, which is an absolutely crazy escalation, a tit for tat that could derail at any time.
Right now, Pepe, Iran is saying that it is going to hit Israel hard again because there has been back and forth strikes between them, and that it's going to use even more powerful weapons. But this comes as we just had this BRICS summit, Pepe, and I wanted to ask you about what is the relationship in your estimation between what's happening right now in West Asia, this escalating trend toward war with Iran, the rhetoric is getting deeper, and BRICS in the BRICS summit? And in particular, how do you believe the Russia-Iran relationship has played a role in this escalating tension? Because it seems like, and I say this a lot, that wherever there's one country like Iran being targeted, or Russia, for example, by the unipolar world, it really is a war on the whole new order that they are trying to build, led now by BRICS. So your thoughts?
Wow. I would need really hours, Danny, and all of you, our audience, to get into the details of how historically important was everything that happened those 3 days in Kazan. I had a humble attempt. I wrote a trilogy last week. I published. Yeah, it's great if you are able to read them in sequence. It was published throughout last week. Getting into a lot of details, geoeconomic, the discussions, and of course the challenges, and trying to impart to our audience the atmosphere and the sense of gravitas, and at the same time exhilaration by most of the participants and the official delegations, because they knew that they were making history. I interpreted I try to come up with different images and metaphors to qualify Kazan. One of them was that it was a launching pad and the station on a David Bowie-esque station-to-station metaphor. You know, the first station towards this multipolar, multinodal, more equanimous world, because the building where we were was in fact a station. It was a series of pavilions linked to the airport, the Kazan airport, and also linked to the Aero Express train to the city of Kazan. So that was an actual station, physically, spatially. And inside, we had a microcosm of the Global South, and that was extraordinary. Including, I was very privileged to meet a lot of analysts and journalists from all over the Global South, a lot of Africans, Central Asians, wonderful people from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, for instance, from India, from Pakistan, from Algeria, from Venezuela, really outstanding. And there were some very, very powerful images that I don't know if the West, because I forgot about the West, at least for 1 week in Kazan. I didn't even pay attention to what they were not printing in their front pages, for that matter. Now, there were a few stranded Western journalists over there. In fact, a few of us were helping a girl from the New York Times. She was pregnant, obviously tremendously inexperienced to cover something like that. And all of us, the older foreign correspondents, we were actually helping her. You know, we adopted her. while we were waiting for the Putin press conference, for instance, which was something that lasted 4 hours. And there was NBC was there, the usual clown from the BBC, which, by the way, is a resident. He's a guy that hates Russia so much, but he's a resident of Moscow. So why don't pack your bags and leave, idiot? But he's still there. But the main French channel, TF1, a young guy, by the way, well informed, and by our conversation, I could tell that he knew what was going on, but he was not allowed to say it to a French mass audience. You see, another image, and then I reflected about that at least 2 or 3 days. I think this is more appropriate. It was a gigantic lab. This was a giant lab, and this Kazan positioned the BRICS as a giant lab. They're going to try to test models of everything. New international relations, new forms of international relations, revamping international institutions, reform of international institutions, which they know is going to be very, very hard. And all that is included in the Kazan Declaration, the official document, which was released on the first day of the top 3 days. It's a sort of letter of intentions and a huge manifesto as well. It's enormous because it's very ambitious, and at the same time, it's not confrontational. These are the 9 BRICS, and obviously there was input from the new BRICS partners, the 13 new BRICS partners, and this is very, very important. They announced this on the second day. And the new BRICS partners is fascinating because there are 3 Africans, 2 Latin Americans, Turkey, very, very important, 2 from Central Asia, the top 2 from Central Asia, and 4 from Southeast Asia, which is the next big powerhouse of the 21st century. Among the tens of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, these 4 powerhouses now are BRICS partners, so the relation is very, very close, and sooner or later they'll become full BRICS members: Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And they were all there, huge delegations, lots of journalists from all of them, not to mention Chinese journalists. There were people from Xinhua, from the big Chinese papers everywhere. So you could tell that this was the Global South on the move. And the big story was on the second day, on the third day, I'm sorry. Putin's press conference was in the afternoon. This was in the morning and lasted 3.5 hours, 3 hours, 25 minutes. The big table with the BRICS, the official BRICS, the 9 BRICS, and BRICS Plus, including the partners. So we had 36 nations represented in the big table, Russia plus 35, including heads of international organizations like Guterres for the UN, Dilma Rousseff for the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank. Equal time for everybody. Some of the speeches were absolutely outstanding. And this was, let's say, Bandung 1955 on steroids. So that's the most appropriate image, in fact. This is the post-colonial, beyond colonial world, affirming its voice side by side with big powers like the 4 top BRICS, the Primakov Triangle, which I expanded upon in one of my columns, Russia, India, China. These are the real drivers of BRICS, and Iran. So this is the Primakov quartet, we can say. These are the ones, these are the civilization states that are going to drive BRICS from now on. Of course, in the middle of all that, enormous challenges. I waited until my last column of the trilogy to list some of the challenges. And if you read, all of you, if you read it, you're going to see that the BRICS, not only they are not antagonistic, but they really would love to reform the system from the inside, even knowing that this will be impossible. Like from day one, they said, we are going to present the Kazan Declaration to the UN Security Council. We all know what's going to happen with this declaration at the UN Security Council. No? The 3 Western powers of the 5 are going to dismiss it or not even read it. We already know that. Of course, the BRICS already know that as well. But this is a very important move because the other members of the UN will take note and will continue to conduct their conversations with the BRICS and the BRICS partners, irrespective of what the UN Security Council is going to manifest about it, So these things were very, very symbolic. They were very, very important. The declaration, this manifesto, the big table with the 36 nations, and of course, Putin's press conference at the end, because he had to be cut short because he said at the end, I still have 5 bilaterals waiting for me. And this was early evening of the last day. So Putin probably slept 2 hours a day during the whole summit, all the bilaterals, and he had to chair all the big meetings, plus receptions at night, the gala dinner, you name it, So it was historically, it was very important. It was huge as an occasion for the consolidation of the power of the global South. But we know the road ahead is going to be, I would say, even terrifying sometimes. And afterwards was fascinating because we started to get some echoes, lateral echoes, underground echoes, or echoes flying around, from different sources, including, for instance, an excellent interview by Alexei Mozhin, which until a few days ago was the Russian executive director for Russia at the IMF in Washington. He gave an absolutely devastating interview because he's coming back to Russia. He resigned from the IMF, from his position at the IMF. He's going back to Russia. He's going to be a special advisor to Elvira Nabiullina, the head of the Russian Central Bank. But many of us, including, for instance, a former vice president of the NDB in Shanghai, my friend Paulo Nogueira Batista, the Brazilian economist. And many of us, we believe that Alexei would be the ideal new head of the NDB in Shanghai to turn it upside down and reform it from scratch. This is going to be very hard because Putin already said that he supports Dilma Rousseff, the former Brazilian president, to remain as the head of the NDB. Diplomatically, I can tell you guys, all of you, that this is not the position of the most able economists around the top BRICS. So if that happens, would be a Russian political decision, abdicating from their rights to be the next president of the NDB, because starting next year, the presidency of the BRICS Bank falls for Russia. So this is a very, very tricky subject. But coming back to Mozhin, I don't want to get into, because obviously I'll be roasted alive if I tell you what I really think about this whole story, including from insiders at the NDB. Anyway, what's the most important thing is what Mozhin said at this in this interview to RIA Novosti. He confirmed the blacklist of the IMF. There are countries who are on the black list and they will never get any help whatsoever from the IMF. You can imagine some of these: Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, now Burkina Faso and Mali as well. Georgia, because Georgia, the vote was wrong. Basically, the Westerners said, no, you voted, but you didn't vote for the right party. So there is, and this was confirmed by an IMF insider until recently. Mozhin was there for 23 years. And he confirmed that essentially the IMF is against the BRICS. So this is absolutely bombastic. And compare with the Kazan Declaration, where one of the paragraphs is the BRICS manifesting their desire to, enhance the power of the IMF, but by reforming it and having more power for countries for the global South. in the voting system. So we see the direct clash. And the war of the Bretton Woods institution against the BRICS is intimately linked to the war of the American ruling classes against the BRICS. And this is bipartisan. This is the American establishment, which sees the BRICS as a threat, especially because the three existential threats to the dominion of the empire, in their own words and conceptualization, are three BRICS: Russia, China, and Iran. And now I'm going to get to your answer after this enormous BRICS introduction, answering your question. In the next few days, literally a question of a few weeks maximum, Iran and Russia are going to sign their comprehensive strategic partnership agreement, which has been basically, it has been debated for the past 2 years. It's very comprehensive, very detailed. It will be signed in person by Pezeshkian and Putin, most certainly in Moscow. And that includes, of course, military collaboration, which is something that we're going to start to see more and more when it comes to the Israel-Iran undeclared but de facto war now, which is an absolutely crazy escalation, a tit for tat that could derail at any time. It was one of the main topics of discussion in the bilaterals in Kazan, of course. It is one of the main topics of discussion among the four top BRICS, the Primakov Triangle plus Iran, the Primakov Quartet. And of course, well, what we already know is that not only Iran is very well equipped to inflict serious pain to Israel, but Russia weapons and Russian hardware is already in Iran for quite a while. Aerial defense and S-400 systems, among other things, undisclosed things that nobody knows about. So this does not mean, of course, that Russia is totally behind Iran in terms of Israel, because the Russian position is extremely complicated, as we all know, because of the 1.5 million Russians who live in Israel, double passports, the invisible agreements of mutual non-attacking that they have in Syria, that Israel is always disrespecting, by the way, and in other latitudes as well. The presence of the very powerful Israeli lobby and Zionist lobby in Moscow as well. But Russia, Iran, India to a certain extent, and China perfectly see that the big overarching war is a war against the BRICS, not necessarily only against, specifically and in certain latitudes, against Russia in Ukraine, against China, depending on who gets to the White House, certainly involving Taiwan, and against Iran in terms of Israel especially. It's a war against the BRICS because these are the three top BRICS. And in the case of India, of course, India is not part, the war is not against India yet, because India is playing a very careful balancing act, not antagonizing the Americans directly, but obviously they are investing a lot, not only in their very, very good relationship with Russia, especially in terms of energy, but the relationship India-Iran, because of the international north-south transportation corridor, which happened to be one of the top geoeconomic items discussed during the 3 days in Kazan. And Putin mentioned it on the record several times, not only his press conference, but before, after the bilaterals, you name it, on the table of the big 36, the BRICS plus the partners. And the other big corridor is what I prefer to call, I prefer the Chinese denomination, the Arctic Silk Road, which the Russians call the Northern Sea Route, which is going to be the post-Suez Canal connectivity corridor. So this was the geoeconomical connectivity corridor angle of Kazan, which was top of practically every discussion, because they were discussing the Chinese Silk Road horizontal corridors across the heartland, and also the north-south corridors, especially the north-south Russia, Iran, and India, which north to south. So we have a sort of cross across Eurasia of connectivity corridors, plus the Maritime Silk Road in the Rimland in the south and the Arctic Silk Road in the north. So what is the basic story? Eurasia is interconnecting. Everybody is interconnecting with everybody else at an amazing, astonishing pace. And we cannot even imagine how this is going to be in, let's say, 4 years from now, to be realistic, when most of these corridors will be practically finished and working, right? So we had all these levels in Kazan. The big geopolitical level, okay, we cannot antagonize the West. We are mostly a non-Western group. We are not an anti-Western group. And we know that we cannot go frontally against them, because this is we are in it for a very long haul. And we are organizing ourselves in terms that we're going to have all the institutions that we need. If there is a radical split, there is already, but if it becomes absolutely, you cannot find an alternative, the Global South will have its own institutions, will have its own geoeconomic arrangements, its own connectivity corridors, its own settlement forms of payment in national currencies, later on in gold and national currencies. So, we didn't have explosive details about, okay, tomorrow we're going to launch BRICS Pay. No, BRICS Pay, they had a test drive 1 week before Kazan, that little card that they distributed at the BRICS Business Council meeting, a card, you can buy a cappuccino with it, of course. First, you need to deposit some funds in it. And also the system that the BRICS called BRICS Bridge, which is an adaptation of the M Bridge, which was invented by the Bank of International Settlements, and among the observers are the European Central Bank, even the IMF itself. And it was this was priceless. When they heard that Putin was promoting, Putin, between commas, of course, that the BRICS were promoting BRICS Bridge, which was inspired in the M Bridge, they started, the usual suspects behind it started to think about canceling M Bridge, saying, no, now the BRICS want to copy what we did. No, the BRICS are adapting a system for their own benefit. And that includes countries that are part of M Bridge, like China. China is part of M Bridge. The Emirates, which is a BRICS member, is part of M Bridge. Thailand, which is now a BRICS partner, is part of the M Bridge. And what is M Bridge? Basically, the famous example that I'm always telling everybody, because it's the easiest way to grasp it. Thailand buys oil from the Emirates and they pay with M Bridge without using currencies. So the BRICS can do the same thing for big transactions among big BRICS companies everywhere, in energy, in infrastructure building, or simple commerce, agricultural commerce, you name it. And you have the BRICS bridge unit, and you don't need currencies. So they're already starting, they're going to start testing the models. And that's the great part about it, because immediately after Kazan, people from finance tech in China and Russia said, wonderful, let's start testing all these models. So once again, that's the metaphor of BRICS as a giant lab. What we're going to see from now on is lots of testing everywhere in this big decentralized lab. And 1 year from now, we're going to have already results. So this is because this is a long-term process. before the end of the decade, we're going to have many of these models and many of these stratagems and mechanisms working in terms, of course, of what? More connectivity, bypassing the US dollar, using a national currencies, and later on, probably a basket or a mix between gold and national currencies, reform of international institutions. And if they don't reform, it doesn't matter because the BRICS will upgrade their own, including the new development bank, which needs an overhaul total because the statutes of the bank are based in the US dollar. So what we saw in Kazan was literally this high-speed train leaving the station, carrying all these excited passengers, and it's okay. Let's try everything, and we still have a few years to do it before, of course, the hegemon goes crazy on a rampage, or decides to go for all-out war instead of only degrees of hybrid and all that. So that was the basic lesson out of Kazan, Danny, and everybody else. It was outstanding to be there, to see history in front of you. So I can imagine this was the feeling of people who were in Bandung in 1955 were feeling. But then it went downhill because the global south was not powerful enough, and the US empire was ultra powerful. And now it's a completely different equation, right?
Yes, yeah, we are indeed in a different equation, Pepe, and that was a incredible summary of all the developments that happened at the BRICS summit.